Morning, everyone. For those of you who are just joining, we're just waiting a little bit of time for people to dial in, put in passcodes, etc., and we'll be starting very soon. Right, I think we might get started soon, Helen, and we can start with introductions and things while people might still be dialing in, just to, out of respect for everyone's time. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to talking a little bit about content strategy today. And I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to run through a little bit about what we're covering to start off with.
Thanks, Claire. And just to let you know as well, as we kick this off, we've got a Q&A box. So please do put your questions in throughout. And what we'll do at the end of this webinar is we will answer them. It should be about 30 minutes, and then we've got around 10 minutes for questions. So today, what we're going to be covering is, first up, it will be the changing context for digital content. So looking at how the digital content has changed over the past few years and what that means for content today. We'll then be looking at common content challenges that have been holding companies' content programs back. And we'll look at the still compelling case for content and why, despite the challenges, content still remains an essential tool for marketers.
And then I'll be picking up to her, talk a little bit about strategy and effectiveness and why we think it's such an important tool. I'll introduce our content strategy framework and how we think about content strategy at Stratton Craig. And then we'll talk a little bit about planning for effectiveness and implementing efficiently, really addressing some of those key challenges we see our clients face. So probably should have said this first. I'm Claire Wilson. I'm head of copy and strategy here at Stratton Craig. Some of you may be clients we've worked with already, but if not, my background before I moved to the wrong side of the world was in asset management, and I was head of communications for a large asset management firm based in Sydney. So I've got a long history of experience in financial services, but also now 7 years in the UK working with clients to work across all types of strategic communications campaigns. And I'll hand over to Helen to introduce herself.
So I'm Helen Proctor. I'm one of the account directors here at Stratton Craig. I joined last year. I've been working in marketing and communications agencies for more than 8 years. So typically I work across the financial services, energies and technology sectors, and I oversee content management as well as develop strategies to shape future ideas and execution. So the way in which we consume and even write content has changed dramatically, and that pace of change has really accelerated over the past few years. So what we're going to be doing over the next few slides is we're going to be taking a look at what that means for content in today's day and age. The information age began in the mid-20th century, and it's typically characterized by a rapid shift from traditional industries to an economy centered on information technology. So as you can see from some of the stats that you can see on screen here, we're constantly receiving information, and this bombardment of content then starts to veer into a complete information overload. So to give you some examples on this, the average iPhone user will unlock their phone around 80 times a day. The average amount of data consumed is around 74 gigabytes per day. And just to contextualize that, that's the amount of data that an extremely educated person would have processed in their lifetime around 500 years ago. And then the average number of ads seen in a busy metropolitan area is between 50 and 400, but actually only 12 to 15 of those make an impression. And you might see that in certain blogs and articles, they'll tell you that you actually see 10,000 ads a day, but in reality, that would mean that you see an ad every 6 or so seconds while you're awake, so it isn't realistic. So the actual number is around 50 to 400, which is still quite a lot. And then as a result, audience is just becoming so much more difficult to engage with. So what that means is that companies really need to work harder than ever to be heard and believed. And with the bombardment of information, just companies just need to start looking at what they can do to really cut through that noise to make an impression. So to highlight some of the facts on that, the average human attention span is around 8.25 seconds. And then if you're trying to target audiences on platforms like TikTok, it's actually a lot lower. It's around 3 seconds. And then in 2022, it was reported that the average person looked at around 1,596 articles. But in reality, they actually only read around 300 articles. So this just shows that we really need to work harder to make sure that we can engage with audiences now. And it's not just content overload that we're seeing. There's a massive tools available as well to help support with content production and planning. And a lot of them are just doing pretty similar things, to be honest. So a number of these tools, it can be quite overwhelming, and it can make it hard to create a completely joined up content program. And also some of these tools can inadvertently create new problems as well. So scheduler tools, for example, you could be set to schedule a post on social media, like baking a cake, for example, and accidentally post that on a topically insensitive day, such as Blackout Tuesday. So some of the tools that are available that you can see on screen here, there's things like workflow planning, content creation, SEO analysis, content management, and publishing. But we also now have AI tools, and that just adds a whole other dimension into the mix. So while all of those tools do promise to try and make content creation more efficient and effortless, efficiency doesn't equal effectiveness. And although 3 out of 4 B2B marketers are already using AI tools, it takes quite a lot of time to optimize the right prompts, to create iterative drafts, to fact check the output, and it can only really create generic content by definition. And when we think about what makes content stand out, it's content that's insightful, it's high quality, it sounds like it's been written by a human rather than something that you can just get on the web. And while AI can't fix the things that content marketers struggle with, it actually adds to the problem by adding more volume of content out there, making it harder for content to stand out. So there's several challenges that hold content programs back. According to the Content Marketing Institute survey for 2024, here's a list of the challenges that they feel B2B industries and organizations are faced. And we believe that these can be categorized into 4 key challenges. So first one being misaligned, and by that we mean misaligning to the business strategy and therefore not highlighting the true value of the business products or services. There's unfocused, which by that we mean content that isn't targeted to the right audience, or it could be that it's optimized for only one audience, or it's lacking SEO consideration. It could be that it's the wrong content on the right channel, or even the right content on the wrong channel. It could be content that's not even optimized for a channel. Ultimately, if you don't know what your content is doing, if you haven't got a purpose for it, then the chances are it's not doing it very well. Inefficient, so this refers to content that's far too labor intensive, drawing on internal resources to extract insights from the business, but then gets underutilized by other people within the business that don't even know about it. And ineffective, so it could be that you're monitoring your content, but you're not focusing on the right metrics or not monitoring at all. And then that means that it becomes difficult to demonstrate the effectiveness of it to senior leadership teams. So despite the challenges, content remains an essential tool for marketers. It makes your expertise tangible to your audience, and this is really important for companies selling services. It enables decision-making processes. So 90% of B2B buyers will research 2 to 7 websites before making a purchase. And the B2B buyer journey includes consuming up to 13 pieces of content on average. It builds credibility with customers. So essentially, you're solving their problems and positioning yourselves as a thought leader in their industry. It's cost effective. Content marketing costs up to 62% less than traditional outbound marketing, and it actually generates 3 times as many leads. It fuels SEO, so it's a core building block of SEO content is. So essentially, if your content program isn't as effective as it could be, then it could be a huge missed opportunity and a completely wasted investment.
And it's probably worth pointing out there that in addition to content marketing, our strategic tools can really also help all types of content. We know whether that's web content that you're creating for a career site, etc. Really, you need to take the same sort of strategic approach to everything that you're doing. But that is actually now my turn to take over. And I'm going to take a moment to apologize for my lighting design because I realize I'm very dark here. Helen has got hers sorted and I have not. But I did want to talk a little bit about the link between strategy and effectiveness. So sadly for me, I am actually old enough to remember when content marketing was a new thing and had been working for several years at that point as well. But it's not new anymore. But one of the things that we've seen as content programs have matured is that the strategies that drive them haven't always matured at the same pace. Often we see strategies that have become rusted on, not necessarily refreshed or revisited unless something becomes badly broken. But we still believe that a sound content strategy remains the key to content effectiveness. So going back to basics, the basic building blocks of a content strategy still apply. And that starts with understanding what it is you're looking to achieve, um, the content that's going to help you to achieve it, and then planning out how you're going to implement that. And the idea is that obviously, with all of these in place, then you'll be able to deliver the right messages at the right time to the right people. But more than that, we think it's really important that a good content strategy lets you own the space that you're playing in. And this comes back to that point about information overload that Helen mentioned earlier. We're really competing now in such a content-rich world with so much information to cut through. If you haven't thought really clearly about actually owning the space, chances are that you're not necessarily going to stand out from your competitors. So being where your audience is, that's really important in terms of knowing where they look for information, understanding the priorities that they're dealing with, answering the questions that they have that you might be able to help them with. Using the right tone to connect with your audience. It sounds really simple, but human beings, even when they're a workplace, are actually still human beings, and none of us want to be bamboozled by jargon and corporate nonsense. And then finally, we believe like a really good content strategy should create, oh, it's the wrong way around. It should be demand, not just traffic. That's okay. We'll fix that for after, and everyone can pretend it's the right way. But previously, content strategies always focused on just driving traffic and not necessarily measuring the quality of that traffic and whether it was getting results. That's something that we think is a mistake. And actually, if you're thinking a little bit differently about it, you can use your content to create demand in place of that. So, to that end, we've recently updated our approach to content strategy, sort of thinking a bit more broadly about how we apply it, moving beyond just we're developing some content themes and planning a content calendar, really thinking about how strategy can support content from end to end throughout the content lifecycle. So one of the key things we've done around that was we've added SEO capabilities to our services here. We've onboarded an absolutely brilliant new head of digital. She'll be blushing because I know she's listening now. But we're also calling out more types of services that we're seeing demand for from our clients. And that's around mature content programs that need content audits to figure out what's still working, what's not, process management, establishing governance, etc. around content. So as you can see, it is really that sense of, content has matured in terms of the way it's being used. We need to adapt our processes to mature and how we manage it and make sure it's still remaining effective. So the first challenge we're going to look at, and Helen mentioned this earlier, is around alignment. There are some really common causes for why this happens in large organizations. The first one being that it's very easily pulled in multiple directions by stakeholders with competing priorities. And I know some of our clients are on the call and they'll probably be nodding along with me because it really is a challenge. I quite often use the example of a workplace I used to work in, which once came out with a brilliant new strategic plan, which had 11, no less than 11 strategic priorities. Now, of course, what happens when you've got 11 strategic priorities is that people are running around like headless chickens. I was going to say something rude, but I didn't. Headless chickens trying to address them. And what actually happens is that none of them get done satisfactorily. Or it might be that you've got an organization where you have certain people who are more willing or able to write than others, leading to one section of your business being seriously overrepresented in terms of your content. We quite often see that with law firms where you have, quite prolific partners, but it can mean you end up with a quite unbalanced representation of the services you provide. And then the difficult thing is you don't want to necessarily stamp on their creativity and discourage them, but you do need to have some structure around, are you balancing your organization's strategic priorities? Are you representing them evenly and equally? Or you might find that your people suffer from what I call the curse of knowledge. Actually, it's a Steven Pinker term, but the curse of internal knowledge was mine. And that's where they've lost sight of the so what for clients or prospects. And your content ends up not necessarily focusing on the things your clients value most about you. Rather, you end up focusing on what you want to say about yourself, which, as we all know from that friend at the pub, isn't as engaging as we think. So I'm going to talk through a few of the tools we think can help people with these. And that first one is taking an approach to content pillars. So, trying to be known for absolutely everything is one of the quickest ways to become known for nothing in particular. So, instead, we recommend that our clients are really intentional about the space they want to own and really disciplined in terms of how they pursue it. So, to create content pillars, it's really those 3 to 5 topics that your brand will consistently discuss, amplify, and create content for. Um, it might sound, I mean, 3 is probably for a large organization not enough, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend somebody try to go for, 7 to 10. What ends up happening then is your content ends up just being a wash of too much noise there. So it's really an essential step in terms of thinking about what you're going to own. And we use a range of inputs in terms to deliver to determine what those pillars should be, whether that's business objectives, audience needs, your USPs compared to your competitors, what the competitive landscape is, what other people are speaking about, where there are opportunities for you to own a certain topic or a theme. We'll incorporate keyword research into that, so understanding what your audience are looking for, analyzing where your content is performing well, and even audience feedback and FAQs. So I think one of the important things I think about the process of establishing pillars is it can be a really great convening process in terms of bringing together the voices within your organization and agreeing what it is you're going to focus on. And then sometimes that can give marketing teams ammunition in terms of pushing back against the range of random requests, content requests that happen, because we know they do. Now, the next one to look at, those content pillars, we recommend then supported by topic clusters. So basically multiple content pages that take a different angle or view on a topic. And this is one of those things that really helps you broaden out your reach. So speaking to a broader audience, finding ways to get new people interested in what it is that you're trying to sell can be a really powerful way of making your content more effective. They're also a really powerful SEO tool because they help increase page authority and improve rankings. But to be successful at this, you need to ensure you're creating content across your pillars and not inadvertently favoring some over the others. So again, it's a really useful way to ensure balanced coverage and push back on some of those noisier internal customers. We all know who they are. Um, and this is somewhere that a fresh perspective of an agency can be extremely useful. Obviously, we would say that. And that's in finding different ways to tackle an issue that are going to resonate with your audience. We quite often help clients establish a content program. And for the first couple of rounds of idea generation, the business will come with a load of great, fresh, new ideas. And we find that that tends to really peter out as the program goes on. Again, a fresh perspective can help with that, but also some structured thinking about what it is that makes a topic relevant and interesting to people. So, this is one of the frameworks we use when we're thinking about an idea. It's something that we sense check ourselves with in terms of um, does the idea that I have these elements to make it a really useful and valuable insight to an audience? So those elements are an observation. So that's a compelling fact or a core truth about your industry, society, company, or context. Importantly, there's a tension. So there's an issue associated with that truth that your audience needs resolved or it needs redress in some way. And then finally, what makes a really strong, unique piece of content is a unique or strong position on that. So your company has a way to solve that issue, a point of view that's unique or different, or some information that can help your audience address that. And we believe those three things combined together create a strong angle on a topic that then demands attention and makes it really relevant to your audience. So this is one of the things that we find especially important when clients come to us talking about wanting to do thought leadership. Um, because thought leadership isn't just, oh, I've put out a load of content and I expect people to read it. Thought leadership is really measured by the quality of those insights that you're sharing, the uniqueness of your perspectives, whether you're sharing proprietary information around it, whether you're leading the conversation on an issue. So we really encourage people to be as insight-led as possible in terms of the content they're creating. This is a story, I'm just checking the time, have I got enough time? A story I quite often tell people in terms of uh, working an asset management firm, and the sales team would come to me and say, I'd like to send out a newsletter next week. And you'd say, that's great. I'm happy to help you do that. What would you like to say in the newsletter? And they'd say, I don't know. I just want to send a newsletter out. Yeah, okay. Well, what are we going to say that's going to make it relevant to your clients? Again, they would just say, no, we just want to send a newsletter, Claire. So I'm sure some of you on this call can sympathize with that situation, but really having a think about what you have to say to make it really relevant and engaging is such an important step. So I have included a worked example of this in terms of a blockchain situation, but I've realized now that I am actually probably already talking too much, so I'm going to skip over this. We will be sharing the deck and the recording afterwards, so you can always stop and pause later on. But one of the things we think is so important about this, that structure, is it really helps you get into the shoes of your audience, think about what's relevant to them, and then make sure that you're focusing your content on them. Another way that's really important to do that is by understanding what your audience is looking for, the questions they're asking, and the problems they need help solving. And this is where SEO comes in. I know for some people, SEO has become a bit of a dirty word in the sense of, oh, it's just random lists of keywords that we just have to stuff into a page. That's not how you do effective SEO whatsoever, and it's certainly not the approach we take at our organization. But we have been a victim of those long random lists of keywords that people try and shove in everywhere. And somebody looked for me yesterday to find a really relevant example here. And some that can't even be used in a sentence. One was cavity wall insulation cost bungalow. So I'll leave you with that for a moment while I have a drink of water and think about how you would use that in a sentence. But our approach to SEO is very much more around really prioritizing where the most effective keywords are going to be to get the results that you want as an organization. Ooh, don't know how I did that. Now, another really important strategy tool that I think is a little bit underused, but adds a huge amount of value is messaging houses. So again, when you're immersed in what you do day in, day out, it's really easy to lose sight of what's most important to your audience, particularly if you have multiple audiences to address. And this can be a challenge. Obviously, adapting language and content to an audience is a specialist skill set. As writers, it's something we do almost every day, but you may find that people within your organization don't have that same skill set. So by rigorously identifying the priority key messages that are most relevant and engaging, creating approved wording that people can then use almost in a pick and mix way for a range of situations, you can significantly elevate the impact of your content and give your people the tools they need to communicate more effectively. And then the final way I wanted to talk about looking at your audience and thinking about the experience they have in dealing with your content is by understanding how your content is working along the customer journey. So Helen talked earlier about the importance of understanding the job of each piece of content and also not expecting every piece of content to do every job. Mapping your customer journey is a really important way to identify where you have any gaps across the funnel or points of friction that you need to address. This is particularly important in the middle of the funnel for B2B content. We know that sometimes very significant purchasing decisions are made by a procurement panel rather than one key decision maker. And in that sense, they're going to likely to be really extensively researched. So if you're working in an industry where you know that's the case, then it may be that you need to have much heavier coverage of content within the middle of your funnel. The other thing that a panel of decision makers means is that you may be addressing different communication styles. So there might be a senior leader that just needs the headlines, the highlights, but you may also have a procurement person whose job is to delve into those details there. So we need to be thinking about whether we've met all of those communication needs with the content that we provide. And now we're going to have a look at how strategy can help you implement your content program more efficiently. So, in our experience, often just extracting the core messages or the insight or the story can be the hardest part of the content creation process. Subject matter experts are often time poor and they don't have the ability or inclination necessarily to create content themselves. So, a really important part of establishing a successful program is establishing mechanisms to extract that insight from your business. Well, it sounds a bit mean when I say it like that. Gently absorb it from their business. And this might be by arranging journalistic style interviews with a copywriter. I can introduce you to some if you like, or by establishing a regular editorial panel with representatives from across your organization, where you can, match the perspective of sales in terms of their client-facing views with subject matter experts around products, etc. But once you have captured a valuable insider story, it's essential to make sure that you're making the most of it. So this is why we really recommend thinking about all the different ways that insight could be translated across different formats, channels, and it really just helps to maximize the value or the impact of the insights in your organization. This chart here is also another way in terms we can sort of extend the value of that over a longer period of time. So rather than just putting a lot of work into a large piece of content, a big rock content or hero content, planning out ways that you can promote that over time so that the value of that piece doesn't dissipate. And now the content calendar, quite a humble tool, but a real stalwart of the content strategy toolbox. A few reasons for this. It doesn't just help you visualize what you're planning in terms of have you covered off the topics you need to, the audience you need to address, what's coming up in terms of topical events, etc. Valentine's Day down there on the bottom left, my favorite. It's also essential for creating visibility of content within your organization. And Helen touched on this earlier. Your sales team are a really important channel for sharing and amplifying your content, but if they don't know what they have at their fingertips, they can't make the best use of it and incorporate it into their client development planning. So, a final challenge I'm going to look at is ensuring effectiveness of content. Now, this sounds relatively simple, but in actual fact, we're overwhelmed almost with digital metrics at the moment. And one of the things I find often is that clients will be working with a digital reporting tool that gets sent to them every single month, and it's not necessarily being used to roll those insights back into the content strategy, adapt the plan for next time, change what's happening based on the performance of your content in the moment. From time to time, we look at those digital reports when we receive them and we think actually it isn't giving us enough granular insight about what's working, why it might be working, and therefore what we can do more of. So again, we always recommend that it's really important to take a close look at the metrics that you're monitoring, make sure they're telling you useful stories and information about your content and how it's performing so that you can then roll that into a valuable feedback loop and make sure that you're learning every single time from the content that you're publishing, how it's going to be more effective next time round, and actually making changes to the process as you go. Now, I have definitely talked too much, so I'm going to hand back to Helen.
Thank you. So just as a reminder of the 4 key challenges and how a strategic content program can help that, it can help ensure alignment, so making sure that the business strategy and therefore highlight the true value of the business's products and services. It can help you focus on your audience by having a really clear understanding on what each piece of content is supposed to be doing. It can help you implement efficiently rather than taking up too much internal resources. And it can also help you measure effectiveness so that you can know how your content's performing against the right metrics. And just to say, content strategy is an ongoing process. It needs to be applied at every stage of the content program rather than right at the start. It's a consistent tweaking and adjusting process to stay abreast of the fast changing landscape. But you don't need to do it on your own. It's important to get a fresh perspective and sense check your approach by experts and have people offer up suggestions, such as us at Stratton Craig.
Anyway, that's the end of the content we wanted to cover off today. So now we can open the floor to any questions that people might have.
So we do have one question around it says you mentioned that AI can't fix the things that content marketers struggle with and only adds to the volume of content out there. Is there anything you think AI would help with content programs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we're actually exploring the use of AI in the own work that we do. And one of the best ways I've heard AI described is an overeager but not necessarily experienced or capable intern, where it can support you in some of the repetitive tasks that you're doing, but it can't necessarily do that experience-based strategic work that makes content really useful. So it can do some heavy lifting in terms of research. But even then, you will still need to fact check its output. It can be helpful if you've got a bit of writer's block in terms of, oh, give me 10 ideas for, X, Y, and Z content title. But again, almost every time what it spits out will need to be refined by a human set of eyes. And a professional copywriter can almost always do a good job. And one of the things we find it very useful for internally in our agency is creating funny images of each other that we share and laugh at.
I'd also add as well that it's been quite useful for some of my clients to look at some competitors and be able to put in some information around competitor content and see what their kind of tone of voice is so that we can then see where we can emulate that in the content that we're writing for that client. And then, as Claire said, it's been really important and such a useful tool in my day-to-day job with research. It takes a lot of the legwork out of doing all of that research upfront, and it's just been really helpful.
Yeah. We do have a question on the chat here from Andrea. How do you make content compelling? Excellent question. And I think it goes back to some of those tools that I was talking about earlier about really understanding what's important to your audience, whether that's via SEO analysis, find out what your audience are asking, the problems you can help them solve. Google is basically a tool for answering questions, right? So if you've got the best answer to a question, you're going to be found. People trust you. The other thing that I find really compelling, and this is goes in terms of conversations with clients as well, is if I show that I've understood those challenges that they face. And for me, my experience working in large organizations has really helped anticipate and plan for some of the challenges I know our clients face. And it's those moments when we're having conversations about you get a lot of nodding around there. Incorporate those ideas into your content. Think of those pain points that your audience might be trying to address, what their priorities are, and really try and elevate those in terms of your headlines. Make it as clear as possible that what you're writing is going to be really relevant to them. Now,
Mm.
we've got a question from Soraya. Hi, Soraya. On the customer journey, how can you measure the ROI and effectiveness of your content? That's going to depend very much in terms of what the output, what the ideal outcome from each piece of content is. So if you've got top of the funnel content, maybe it's, social media, etc. You're really wanting to be driving traffic. So you will be measuring how many people click through, how it's driving traffic to your website. If you're looking for middle of the funnel content, it may be that you want people to explore other types of content around that subject, right? We talked a little bit about the extensive research phase in a B2B procurement process. It might be that you want to nudge them onto different types of content. And if that's the case, then you'd be measuring how much people engage with that content on that page, whether they're consuming all of it. So scroll time, time on the page, bounce rates, where it is they're bouncing to necessarily. So are they navigating your site to other types of content, etc. And then finally, obviously, if you've got a piece that you're really looking for conversions, you'd be measuring the conversions in terms of what do they do as a result of that? Did they contact you? Did they click on to fill out a form or request a free quote or something. There are other ways around that as well.
And I would say on that as well, there's some metrics that you do need to take a bit of a pinch of salt with. So bounce rate being one of them. It could be you've got quite a high bounce rate, and that it used to be seen as quite a negative thing, but actually it doesn't have to be. It could be that someone's come onto your content, they've read it, they've gotten everything they needed to, and they've gone off it, and so they've bounced off, and that's the reason for the high bounce rate.
Excellent. And we've got a question in the chat here around what AI tools we'd recommend. We've been trialing Jasper AI as an organization, but actually we use a range of them when we find that there are different strengths for different ones. We may need to follow that question up afterwards, though, because the person within our organization who leads on our AI, might have some strong opinions that I might get wrong.
We have another question around could you use a messaging house for an overarching brand message, or could you also create a product or even a service specific messaging house?
Yeah, this is actually something we're seeing a lot more of at the moment, specifically in terms of recruitment content, actually. So people are realizing that in trying to address a war for talent, they may not necessarily be using the right language or content or tone to address early careers audiences. So we're creating audience-specific messaging houses, but you can certainly do that in terms of products as well. And this is something you might often see more play out around, like a battle card or a product sheet that helps sales teams take it out to the market. But that's the same process, right? Identifying those key messages, identifying those USPs, creating improved language. We also see this in terms of businesses trying to address how they're owning a space in terms of a whole specific theme. So sustainability is one that companies are now coming to us to develop key messaging around their sustainability offering, because it's something they're seeing a lot more scrutiny for. So you can certainly do it at almost every level where you feel you need to make some better impact, or that you could benefit from having done some rigorous thinking around what's really going to cut through for your audience in that space.
And having done messaging houses before, I do find that companies find it really useful and valuable having